August is the perfect time to hit reset before the autumn rush begins, and I can't think of a better place to start than my closet. That's why I love shopping at Quince. I know you're not wearing your Quince Mongolian cashmere sweaters now, but you'll need them for the fall when it's time to put away those Quince golf shorts that you're wearing and that I've been loving in the warmer summer weather, and start looking at your autumn wardrobe. Quince is about fewer, better pieces. Their clothing are made with premium materials, built to last, and designed to become the ones you reach for day after day. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middleman, so you're paying for high quality, not brand markup. Upgrade your everyday. Download the Quince app for app exclusive offers. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada and the UK too. That's QUINCE.com/traveler for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Evening. Buyer's remorse. Buy a new car? I'll be moving in. Let's get started.
Sorry, I think there's been a mistake. I bought it from Carvana.
You what?
Yeah, great price. I even have 7 days to love it or return it.
So there's no...
No buyer's remorse. More like buyer's rejoice.
I guess I'll let myself out. Congratulations. I mean it.
Buyer's rejoice. Buy your car today on Carvana.
Limitations and exclusions may apply. See our 7-day return policy at Carvana.com.
Amateur Traveler, episode 1007. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about canvas and ropes, lobster and s'mores, islands and squalls, as we go sailing on one of the Maine Windjammer fleets, the Heritage. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about sailing a schooner in Maine. This is another episode that's going to be about my travels. No co-host this time, but I will have some sound effects, so stay tuned for that. I don't know if you have a desire to sail on a tall ship like I have, but this isn't something that is new for me. So way back when I worked at HP, when I was fresh out of school, I discovered a brochure for a company that's defunct now, which was Windjammer Barefoot Cruise, that did cruises on sailing ships, tall ships in the Caribbean. And I was able to do one when I was 40. I kept that brochure, or at least that idea of doing that, for a long time. And if you go way back in the episode, in the first year of Amateur Traveler, you'll hear about that trip. But this is a different trip, not the same organization at all, but this is a ship that is part of the Maine Windjammer fleet. And the Maine Windjammer fleet are all sailing ships, all captained by the owners themselves. All the captains live in Maine. There are 9 tall ships in the Maine Windjammer Association, and they carry anywhere from 16 passengers to 31 passengers. I was on the Schooner Heritage, and that is currently the largest vessel in the Windjammer Association, 145 feet overall with a 92-foot deck and 15 cabins and a capacity for 30 guests. I was a guest of the Heritage, meaning that they were paying for my sailing. I paid for getting there, all the expenses before getting on the ship, and then the crew tips. And that's about it, because while you're on board, all meals are covered. There are no charges for shore excursions. We'll talk more about that in a bit. I was on one of the longer voyages, which is a 6-night voyage from July 12th through 18th of this year, 2026. And I want to start by giving a picture here of what this is like, just to give you an idea of whether this is a trip that you might be interested in. This is a trip for someone like me who gets a goofy grin on their face while they're under sail, when they're out on a boat and there is no sound of an engine. There's sound of the wind in the sails, the creaking of the rigging, the laughter of the passengers on deck, that smell of a fresh breeze, and the smell of smoke from the wood stove, or the smell of fresh baked bread or chocolate chip cookies coming from the galley. It's a trip for people who want to relax, because you may spend hours during the day out on the ocean sailing. And the area outside of Rockland, Maine has just so many islands. A common figure used for Penobscot Bay region, which is where you are, is about 1,700 different islands, rocks, and ledges. And Maine as a whole has a total of about 2,000 coastal islands. So no trip on the Heritage is the same as the last one you did. And literally, and this was hard for me to get my head around, but I would talk to Ben, the captain, and say, where are we going today? What's the itinerary? And he didn't have one. It really depended on what was the current, what was the wind, what was the weather forecast, and that would determine what direction we headed. And that's true on most, but not quite all of the cruises, and I'll talk about the exceptions to that later. Some days you would just spend all day on the boat and you wouldn't go ashore. And some days you'd get off the boat, get into a rowboat, rowed by you and your fellow passengers. There were 26 of us on the particular cruise that I was on. We'd fill up the largest rowboat twice and row ourselves into shore, where we might take a hike, or you might have a chance to visit one of the towns, or you might roll over to Lobster Island for a lobster boil. Over the course of the 7 days, 6 nights, we sailed about 116 miles, but that's just going to depend on what the weather was like on the particular week that you're there. Let's talk a little bit about Windjammer tradition here in Maine. The coast of Maine used to be home to thousands of coastal schooners, and they were mostly cargo ships. They were hauling everything from wood, granite, lime, natural ice, bricks, fish and canned goods, Christmas trees, and agricultural products. So they were basically the freight trucks of their time. And there were small schooners, but there were also 6-masted giant cargo ships. When steam power started to make schooners obsolete by the 1930s, there was a man named Frank Swift who started a passenger fleet, eventually up to 5 different schooners that were used for recreation, and in the same way that the Maine Windjammer Association operates today. I'm going to use the word schooner a lot in this episode, so let's talk about what this is. This is a sailing ship with 2 masts, and there are 3 common historic classic sailing ships with 2 masts. A schooner would have the main mast would be in the back, and the foremast would be in the front, and the main mast would be taller. A ketch would be if you put the taller mast in the front, and if you have square sails instead of the triangular trapezoidal shaped sails for a schooner or a ketch, then that would be a brig. Not likely to see a brig these days. And then up here in Maine, Windjammer is used for a multi-day trip, and then it's called a day sail if you don't spend the night on the boat, if it doesn't have cabins, for instance. And then the maritime distinction between a boat and a ship, my understanding is traditionally in the Navy, a boat can be carried aboard a ship. And so this would be a ship, but our captains really just called it a schooner because that's just more specific. So the particular schooner I was on was the Heritage, and of the 9 ships in the fleet, this is one of 3 that was purpose-built as a passenger schooner. So the other 6 were converted over from cargo ships, but this one was designed and built by Captains Doug and Linda Lee. They launched it in 1983 at the North End Shipyard, which is where you sail out of here in Rockland. They built it over 3 winters because winter is the season when you're not sailing. And they built it with only 4 to 10 people, which is pretty amazing because the hull is 95 feet long. So it's a decent sized ship. They operated for 37 years. And during the last 7 years or 6 seasons, because COVID was in there, they missed a season. The current captains, Ben Welzenbach and Sean Grimes, were on their crew. Ben was the first mate and Sean was the cook. And when the Lees decided that they wanted to retire, they sold the boat to Ben and Sean. So Ben and Sean took over the first season coming out of COVID, and Ben acts as the captain and Sean as the cook. But that's a simplification. It's not like you only find Sean down in the galley. The main mast is about 80 feet tall, and then there's a mast that attaches to the top of that. So the top of the rigging is like 102 feet above the water. And occasionally one of the members of the crew, when you're fitting that topsail on the main mast, is climbing up the rigging way up there to 80 feet tall with a harness on that they're attached to. But you won't find me climbing there. I don't think the insurance would also probably allow that. The whole boat is red oak framing and planking, white pine deck. That tall mast, that 80-foot tall mast, was transported from the West Coast by rail. It's a pressure-treated Douglas fir mast. And when it got by rail to the town of Rockland, they transported it in early hours down the street, and with a crane were able then to put it in place. They have to take it off every 10 years for a Coast Guard inspection, and that, I imagine, is a very major challenge. So this is not a replica of an early schooner. It's purpose-built to be a passenger schooner, but it's built in the tradition of these Maine coasting schooners. In addition to Ben and Sean, there were 6 crew members on the ship when I was there. Dwayne, the first mate, who's from Arkansas, Greg, who's attending the Maine Maritime Academy, Emma, Claire, Winter, and Matthew. And when you're watching the crew work, it's really interesting. So when you're getting started, and I'll talk about the whole process of that in a bit, there's a lot of things that have to happen, and they have to happen at the same time, and they have to happen in the right order. And the captain will be barking out orders from the back, sometimes very trivial orders, sometimes very important, very timely orders. They're very cryptic.
Snub a little. Home little.
And I was keeping track of some of these, so he might shout, "Sheet her in," or "Take a little on the fore," or "Stand by to come about," and the crew would respond back, "Standing by," or "Stand by headsails." So lots of motion going on, being coordinated. And it wasn't until I was about 3 days into the trip that I learned that Claire is the only one who had sailed with this crew last year. And everyone else was new to the ship this year, and they hadn't gone out on the boat and done any of these things at sea until their first cruise with passengers in June. They had raised and lowered the sails and done all the things they needed to do in the dock before that. But it was amazing when you watched the choreography that was going on to think that they had just become a crew within the last month or so when I was there. Not much longer than that. And then Beth is the office manager, Beth Grimes. 2 of the passengers on the ship that I was on are brothers from the Midwest, from Iowa, Nebraska, and they brought their niece a few years back. She loved it. She became a crew member and later on married one of the co-owners, Sean. It was funny when Ben was talking about how he had trained to take the captain's exam. He'd obviously had 6 seasons of being on the crew, some of that being the first mate, and so knew his way around the boat and had enough hours to take the captain's exam. But he used a training program that also helped him train for the test. He had to laugh because he said the name of it was Captain in a Box. So if you're interested in learning how to become a schooner captain, the best way is probably to be a crew member. And you can go from being a passenger to a crew member like Beth did, but you can also get a Captain in a Box program. This is kind of an odd place to mention it, but this is not an expensive cruise. I've talked about luxury cruises before. This is not that. The cabins are smaller. My cabin was probably, well, I'm 6'3" and I fit end to end in the cabin, and it was probably less than 6'3" the other direction. Each cabin has 2 bunks. 2 of the cabins have a toilet, but every cabin has a sink. And then for the rest of you, for the rest of us, there are 3 toilets or heads, marine toilets up on the main deck. And then also one of those has a shower, and that is the only shower on board. So I'm just showering in my room with the washing up with the sink, but other people are taking turns at the shower during the course of the week. So again, not a luxury experience, but also not an expensive experience. With double occupancy, a week-long cruise is about $1,700, and the cheapest cruise available on the Windjammer fleet is less than $1,000. Now, that's going to be for a shorter cruise. They do shorter cruises. One of the reasons they do that is it's easier for people who have not done one of these to commit to a shorter cruise and then find out that they may like it. But the interesting thing for me was when I met the other passengers, when we sat around in the galley at the three tables that are in the galley and introduced ourselves and where are we from, one of the questions was, and have we done a Windjammer cruise before? And I said, sure, yeah, I'd done one down in the Caribbean, but not on this boat or not in this fleet. But other people had done 50 or 25 on this boat, on the Heritage. 60% of their passengers are doing a return trip. One of our passengers, who is from Southern California, he actually booked 5 different cruises on 5 different ships in the fleet over the course of 5 weeks as part of one trip, which is unusual. But less unusual, some of the couples had booked 2 trips back to back. And so they were actually out for 2 weeks. So when we got to our Friday, they were saying they were glad that for them it was just Wednesday. So people love these boats. So let's get underway. It's time to leave the harbor here. So before you leave the harbor, you have some things you have to do. Obviously, you've got very modern things like you're getting water from the dock that is filling up the tanks on board the ship. All the water that you're drinking or all the water that's being used at your sink, both hot and cold, is coming from the tanks, and those are being filled up before you leave the dock because you're probably not filling it up again until they come back a week later. And you unplug from shore power also. The ship does have electricity, so you can use your CPAP machine if you need to, or recharge your phone in your cabin. It's all running on batteries normally during the day, but then they'll fire up a generator when they're at sea, usually when you're at meals, usually when you're down in the galley at breakfast or dinner. Lunch is usually eaten out on the deck, and that way, when that generator is running, which is in the bow of the ship, it's not really disturbing anybody. You don't run it while you're sailing because that would be a noise you don't need. You just want to hear the wind in the sails. So you unplug all of those things. You get ready to cast off all your lines. You've got somebody on shore who's going to throw your lines back to you. You get the anchor ready to pull up. They don't have to pull up the anchor by hand, fortunately, because that would be hard to do. You can certainly do that with windlasses and things like that, but they have an old 2-stroke engine called Joe. And when you fire up Joe, you can tell that Joe is working, and Joe can also be used to raise the sails, both the mainsail and the foresail, or the mainsail and the foresail. But when we were getting out of harbor the first time, we were all going to do that together. And so what they do is they take these very thick ropes. There's a lot of ropes lying all over the boat. They're not lying where you're going to trip on them. They're tied up carefully in different places, but they take one of these ropes and they let out maybe 40 feet of it. And all the passengers can, but are not required to help haul on the rope to pull up the sail. The first part of the hauling isn't so hard. You're just pulling hand over hand and you're not straining all that much so. But by the time you get to that last part where you're getting to the end of it is really a haul. It's a heave, it's a hoe. And all the while you're doing this, there is some song that is being sung. It is sometimes a sea shanty, but hey, this is 2026. And so sometimes it's a pop culture song.
Haul away, oh, haul away, Joe. Now my back is more messed up than the hunchback of Notre Dame. Way, haul away, oh, haul away, Joe.
But it helps you pull together. And so you'll heave and you'll hoe and you'll get to the point where you've finally got that sail all the way up. And then the command will come out to walk my way. And so you'll walk towards the person who is taking that rope and tying it to a belaying pin or a cleat. And then you'll get the command, drop my line. You'll drop the line, and then the crew will coil up that line and then attach it up again to the rigging so that it's out of the way so that somebody's not standing on it. So you do that for the mainsail, you do that for the foresail, you might raise the jibs, the 2 jibs in the front of the boat. Usually that was done by the crew. They're easier to bring up, and so you don't need quite as many hands to do that. The sails number 1 and 2, as they would call out, ready number 1, ready number 2, and the crew would hop from whatever they were doing, whether they were down in the galley or whether they were taking a break if we happen to be in the middle of sailing. Later on, you might raise the peak sails, which are the top sails on both the mainmast and the foremast.
Ready up, peak! Ready for up! Away!
I'm not sure that we did that pulling out of the harbor. And then sometimes we would sail off the anchor. We would get all the sails ready, and then we would pull up the anchor and sail immediately and use the sails to pull us around. But you can't do that when you need to back out of the harbor. You have to lower the centerboard. So these boats are flat-bottomed and don't have a keel like many sailboats would have, but instead they have a centerboard that can be raised and lowered to give them a keel. And so they can raise that when they're in the harbor so that they can go into a shallower harbor. So you're going to lower that at least part way. Maybe you're going to lower it all the way at some point. So you got your sails up now. Start cranking up Joe and getting Joe to pull up the anchor chain. But then you're in the harbor in this first time, and you have to back out of the harbor. And that is not easy with a sailing ship. There is no motor in this schooner. There are no motors in most of the boats, and so instead what they have is they have a yawl boat. That's almost like an external motor. And so it's a diesel-powered engine boat. It's a relatively small boat. The one for the Heritage is called Clark Kent. It turns into Superman and is a powerful enough boat to pull this ship out of the harbor. And the harbor is filled with sailing ships, and it's filled with sailboats, and it's filled with lobster boats. And so I hadn't even realized how hard it is to pull it out of the harbor and get into a channel and get it to the point where you can go under sail. It just hadn't occurred to me how complicated this was going to be. And we did have a little bit of a issue as we were pulling out in this particular time because the wind caught this big boat and pushed us towards one of the lobster boats. And we had to very quickly push off and deploy bumpers.
Grab some fenders and bring them to the port side!
A little bit of drama more than usually as they're pulling out here, but I can't imagine backing this thing. I know my wife hates to back out of our driveway, and can you imagine backing a sailing ship out of its mooring? Even more challenging than that. But at that point, we got underway, and we are ready to get out in the harbor. I mentioned the yawl boat. There are 4 boats on board this ship, and the yawl boat is one of them. That's Clark Kent, and that's the one with the engine. And then there's the larger rowboat that we're going to be using to get on and off of the ship when we're trying to get to shore. And that's Archie. And since you've got Clark Kent, you also have Lois Lane. And Lois Lane is a smaller rowboat that some of the passengers can use to row around the harbor when we're in harbor. And that will hold maybe 8 people. I don't think I saw it with more than 4 or 6 on this voyage. You may have heard about Built as the loyalty program that lets you earn points on rent wherever you live. Well, they just leveled up even more. As of 2026, homeowners can also earn up to 1.25x points on their mortgage payments. This is thanks to Built's 3 new credit cards, the Palladium card, Obsidian card, and Blue card. All 3 turn your housing payments, rent or mortgage, into flexible rewards, so you can choose the card that fits your lifestyle without missing out on points and exclusive benefits. Built points can be redeemed at top airlines and hotels, Amazon.com purchases, future rent payments, and more. Built points have also been ranked by top publications as the industry's most valuable point currency. Your housing payment is already your biggest expense. Make it your most rewarding. Find the card that fits your lifestyle and apply today at joinbuilt.com/traveler. That's joinbilt.com/traveler. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Terms and limitations apply. Subject to approval and eligibility, Built cards are issued by Column NA, member FDIC, pursuant to license from MasterCard International, Incorporated. I've run websites for a long time, like 37 years, and most of that time commercially, most of that time in high tech. And the thing that kept me up at night was that fear of the hack. In cybersecurity, the scariest thing isn't the attack you see coming, it's the attack path you didn't know existed. And Horizon 3 is an AI native proactive security platform that changes that. Here's how it works. Horizon 3 Node 0 is an autonomous AI hacker that continuously attacks your own environment at machine speed, the same way a real attacker would, finding all the areas that are vulnerable. You can stop guessing and start knowing that your defenses are intact because Node Zero's results is a loop. Hack, fix, verify, repeat. It finds the problem, you fix it, and in one click you can confirm it's secure. And then you can sleep better at night. See exactly what an attacker would find in your environment before they do. Go to horizon3.ai/traveler and request your free Node Zero demo. Visit horizon3.ai/traveler. Again, that's horizon3.ai/traveler. No commitment required, results in hours, not weeks. And thanks to Horizon 3 for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. And then there's also the New Meadows, which is a one-person boat. It was originally designed as a rowboat for two small children. And so it really is only a one-person boat. As we were in harbor, some intrepid passengers would borrow the New Meadows and row around the harbor, probably first thing in the morning or towards the evening when we were sitting at anchor. If I've got the story straight, Doug, the original owner of the Heritage, had rescued this boat from the neighbors when he was a kid, intending to fix it up, but never did. And so when he bought the shipyard, his father delivered this boat, and he did eventually then restore it and use it on the Heritage. Because this is a sailing ship, there are times that there is no wind. We would get up sometimes and the flags, which are at the top of the mast, would be hanging limp. And you do have that yawl boat. You do have that Clark Kent boat, which you can use to push you all across Penobscot Bay if you need to. You could use it to push all week long if necessary. But it's mostly used just to get you out of the harbor or into wherever the wind was. You could often see that it was calm, but then a ways out, you could tell where the wind picked up and would catch you. And so you'd use that yawl boat to either pull you or push you into that place. When you're pulling it, usually somebody would be in the boat. That would often be Captain Sean. And so he's down in the yawl boat and getting directions from Ben, who's up at the wheel, in terms of where to pull, which side of the boat to be on. And then sometimes if you're going to push a long distance, then you just tie it with 3 points to the back of the boat and use it like an outboard motor, basically. And at that point, Sean would climb up in the boat and they would just be able to steer the whole thing from the ship's rudder. I know a little more about sailing than I did before this trip. Couple things to know. So a schooner can't sail directly into the wind. So if you drew a circle around the boat, then there's an arc of something like 45 to 60 degrees around where the wind is blowing. So 30 degrees to one side of the wind, 30 degrees to the other, where you can't sail. And then if you're trying to sail in that direction, you're going to tack. You're going to sail to the right, then you're going to sail to the left, you're going to sail to the starboard and sail to the port and zigzag your way through. So, for instance, even though the Heritage has modern navigation equipment, it has a GPS navigator, and that navigator can say, if you're trying to go here, it's going to take you 3 hours. I was looking at it one time with Captain Ben, and I said, oh, look, it says we're going to take 3 hours. And he looked at me like I had two heads and said, yeah, but that's straight. Oh, right. Yeah, we don't sail straight there, or at least much of the time, you're not on a straight course. You're sailing both around islands and obstacles and ledges and things like that, but also you're sailing to take advantage of the wind. And so as you're under sail, you may sail 20 minutes in one direction, in which case the crew is getting the cookies baked in the galley, or they're up on deck reading a book, or they're taking a break because they had the watch last night. And so they're in their very small cubbies, which are both in the galley as well as strewn around the ship. And then the captain will need to do a tack, and so he'll call out for the crew, and they'll run on deck and get ready to move the sail from one direction to the other. So from the right to the left, for instance, if we're going to change directions. The back of both the mainsail and the foresail have block and tackles with a number of different ropes on them so that you can either, as you're raising it, just kind of let it go back and forth. Quite often when we're raising the sails, but we're not yet ready to get it underway yet, one of the crew members would stand there and just kind of let the sail blow freely from the left to the right side as they're holding on to the ropes attached to this block and tackle, trying to make sure that it doesn't hit any of the passengers. And so they clear the passengers out of those two areas, the area behind the wheel, behind the captain, which is where the one block and tackle come down, and then the area just in front of the galley, which is a little less convenient, where the foresails block and tackle are. And so then as they get ready to tack, they'll move that over and then tie that to the batten on one side or the other so that we're ready to take the wind, ready to head in that direction. If you look at the sails too, especially the mainsail, you can see that partway up, there are different ropes that are hanging down from the sail all the way along, maybe 2-foot long, smaller ropes. And you can use that to reef the sail, which is to shorten the sail in case you're in particularly high winds. Now, Ben was telling me that that's not something they do very often. In fact, in the first year that they were sailing the Heritage, they reefed the sail more in that first season than Doug did in the whole 6 years that they were sailing with him, in part because they were being a little more cautious and because Doug had built the boat and knew what it could and couldn't do. And they probably don't reef it as quite as much now, but that's just something that you have to worry about, that you might, if you get up in the morning and you look at your weather forecast and see there are going to be very high winds, you might reef your sail even though you don't need it yet, because it would be quite hard to try and do that while you're underway with sails up if you were suddenly to get hit by very strong gusts of wind. And we'll see later on in this story that if you're not reefed and you do get hit by a strong gust of wind with the sails up, that can be bad. Subtle foreshadowing. Spent some time back with Ben watching, trying to stay out of the way, but trying to learn what he was doing. It's interesting. They have a wind gauge, although he very rarely uses it. He pulled it out and checked what the wind was when I was asking him. But you just get used to, if, for instance, you see the white caps, you know that the wind is roughly 14 knots or so is when you start to get white caps on the waves. And so he's really doing a lot of this just from experience. And they're looking at the weather forecast, and it gets very important if there's going to be real weather, but he's looking for when's the wind going to go, what the tides are doing, because as the tides are coming in, they're going to push the currents into Penobscot Bay. As they're going out, they're going to push you away from that. And so he's factoring that into where he's going to go, how he's going to get there during the day. And he has to think hours ahead in some cases if he sees that weather coming in. And then there's some just general rules of safety on the water. As we were first on the boat, we obviously had to learn the man overboard procedures, which is if someone falls overboard, you immediately yell man overboard. You throw them something quick like a life preserver or a cushion or a life jacket, and maybe even multiple ones. It not only will help them float, but it also is going to help spot them later, because you got to turn this boat around, and then you point to them. Then somebody's going to be assigned to basically keep their eye on where that person is. And one of the passengers said, well, what about if it's a woman overboard? And Captain Ben says, yeah, they don't fall overboard. So apparently it's a guy thing. There are some general rules in terms of who has priority, which ship. And the priority really has to do with who can get out of the way the easier. And so a ship that can't get out of the way has a higher priority. You're going to let that tanker, for instance, go and work around what that tanker is doing because it's very hard to move. And fishermen who are fishing, who have their nets in the water, also have priority because you don't want to go and tangle up their lines. And then sailboats have priority, and then powerboats, who are more maneuverable, are supposed to give way to everybody else. Captain Doug had some rules that he taught Ben, which are, one, ledges have the right of way. So ledges and lighthouses, for instance, are not going to move. And don't forget to pull up the sails and the wind blows, the ship goes. And then his other important one was never use your body as a bumper. So never use your body as a fender or get your body between you and the dock, whether that's you, a crew member, or the passengers, obviously. There are a variety of buoys out in the bay, and I thought that those would have more precise meaning depending on the color of the buoy or whether that buoy has a bell attached or whatever. But really, that just helps identify the buoy, and then you still have to look at your chart to see what it means. So I thought it was going to be as simple as, keep the green buoys to your right and the red buoys to your left, and it's not quite as simple as that. So in addition to the GPS screen, there was also a paper chart out with a great big wooden handle on it that said, "You are here," that helped us passengers figure out where we were, which was helpful. And it was weighed down with different things to keep it from blowing away. Backing up just a little bit, we arrived on Sunday and were able to get on the boat starting at about 5 o'clock, 5 to 7 o'clock in the evening. But you need to eat before you get on board. There's no dinner on the boat that evening. And then on Monday, we sailed out. We didn't start sailing until about 10 o'clock, but we did a fair amount of sailing that day. We sailed out of Rockland Harbor and sailed between North Haven Island and Vinyl Haven. I don't know how to pronounce that, past the Goose Rocks Lighthouse. So this is two big islands with a channel in between, and sailed into Isle Haute Bay. And we ended the day just off Isle Haute. We anchored near Kimball Island. So we sailed about a total of 23 nautical miles, top speed about 9.5 knots. And that is pretty much the top speed for the boat. So we had some good sailing that day. And very quickly then, as passengers, we're falling into routine. We're getting to know each other. We're hanging out predominantly on deck. So there are basically three places that you can be on the boat. There's on deck, there's the galley, which has 3 tables, as I've mentioned, in the 3 corners, and then the kitchen in the 3rd corner with its wood-fired stove. Wood-fired seemed like an odd combination to many of us, but the idea is that you're not using anything that's an accelerant, and wood fires are fairly easy to put out, and they've been handling wood fires on wooden boats for centuries. One interesting thing is the stovepipe that comes up from the stove goes through the deck, and then it can be either shorter or longer, and so often when we were sailing, they would take off the top of the stovepipe, take out the longer piece, and put the top back on so that it wouldn't be up in the way as much, I guess. But sometimes they would sail with a longer stovepipe on there. But around the place where the stovepipe goes through the deck, there was actually a water trough that would cool the stovepipe so that it didn't scorch the deck. An interesting feature. So you could hang out in the galley as long as you didn't get in the way of the cooking. And some people actually were helping out with the cooking or with the washing of the dishes there. And then obviously you could hang out in your cabin as well. But as I said, those aren't all that large. The cabins do have a skylight, or at least I saw 13 different small portholes on the deck for the 15 cabins. I'm not sure where the other 2 would have skylights. No portholes in my cabin. I don't think there are portholes in the other cabins as well. You could cover up that skylight if you didn't want to wake up in the morning when the sun came up. Although quiet hours on the boat start at 10 o'clock because the crew has to get their sleep, so you can't be in the galley then because there are people sleeping in there. And so the rhythm of the boat tends to be go to sleep sometime. Some people are going to sleep at 9 o'clock, but sometime around 10 o'clock and then get up more early. The coffee would be out at 6:15 or so, and then breakfast would usually be about 8 o'clock. If you're in your cabin, there are 2 bunks, as I said. There's lights for each one, as well as a shelf that you could put your phone while it's recharging, some plugs in there, the sink. So not the most fun place to hang out at. So most of the time you spent your time on deck from bow to stern on the boat. Up in the bow, it's pretty complicated with different things that are going on up there. So there are 2 different anchor chains. that are up there. The left-hand side would be your regular anchor, and the right-hand side would be your storm anchor, which is not just a heavier anchor, but a heavier chain. And I didn't realize that much of the work of the anchor is being done by the weight of the chain, not by the anchor itself. So the chain is lying on the floor of the ocean as you lower it. Off to the boat in both directions, there's a cathead, and that is a piece of wood that helps you raise up the anchor. That's what you've got leverage from, so that it's not coming directly out of the hull, but coming down from this cathead. And part of the maintenance of a wooden boat is fixing things when they break, and the previous sailing, they had actually cracked this large piece of lumber that is the cathead. And so as I came by to drop off a bag on the Sunday before the trip, they were doing some major construction work here and replacing this large L-shaped piece of lumber called the cathead so that they'd be ready for the next sailing. And that's just what you have to do for maintenance. Up front also is Joe, that two-stroke engine that is helping pull up the anchor and pull up the sails. Not a lot of space to hang out there in the bow. And then behind the bow is a small cabin, and that is where the stairs down into the second waterproof area goes. So there's waterproof bulkheads along the ship. So there's one set of cabins in stairs that go down there. I say stairs, they're really supposed to be climbed more like ladders. You're supposed to turn around and go down them. And then that's also where the three heads are, including the one with the shower, is in that superstructure there. And then behind that is another structure which has the stairs going down into the main cabin area. That's where my cabin was, cabin number 8. And that has skylights up above, and you can sit to either side of the skylights. There are camp chairs around the deck that are stored in various lockers, and then you can also sit on the lockers themselves. There are lockers everywhere in that middle part of the deck, and some of them, 2 of them, are ice chests. And so as you get there at the beginning of the voyage, they're filling those up with ice. There is no drink package on the ship. What's provided at the various meals is water and lemonade and iced tea, but you can bring your own alcoholic beverages on. There's no corkage fee, and so you can bring your own beer or wine or soda or whatever your drink preferences are, and then store them in those ice chests. They ask you not to fill it up with all your beers, but to put in a few at a time because there is a limited space there. But there was still ice in there at the end of the trip, and so things are staying cold there. But you sometimes have to get people to get off the ice chest because they're sitting on it when you want to get your drink out. There are other chests there that are holding containers and camp chairs that you can sit in on the deck. And so a lot of people are sitting in that general middle area. All throughout that decking there are those porthole skylights that I was talking about for the cabins down below. And the next superstructure in front of that is for the galley. And so there are stairs or ladder going down into the galley there, as well as, again, skylights so that the galley gets light from above. You can sit to both sides of the deck there, going forward from the galley all the way up to the end, which is where the captain's quarters are. There are stairs going down into a different waterproof compartment there. And then behind that, obviously, is the ship's wheel. So the ship's wheel is in the back of the boat. It is mechanically connected to the rudder. There's no fancy hydraulics that would let you put it in the front of the boat. It has to be back there where the rudder itself is. Behind the wheel, there's limited seating because you do have that block and tackle for the main sail, which is going back and forth there. And just in front of the ship's wheel is also where the captain is laying out his charts, as well as the housing for the GPS system and the ship's radio. So they're right there by the ship's wheel, obviously, because the captain is going to spend really most of the time while we're under sail back there at the wheel. That area where you can lie or sit on both sides goes up both sides of the galley all the way back to the captain's wheel. And then when you're doing lunch, one of those sides, usually the top, depending on which way the ship is leaning as you're sailing, is where lunch is going to be laid out. And so you're going to spend a lot of time on the deck. And one of the things that you should know, therefore, is you're going to need to manage your sun. So you might not always want to wear shorts and short sleeves even if the weather is appropriate for that. And it would change a lot. We wore everything from shorts and short sleeves and bare feet to having multiple layers on depending on the weather. And sometimes during the day it would change. You'd go down into your cabin, you'd put on a sweatshirt, you'd come back out and the sun was back out and you didn't need the sweatshirt. So it is changing weather. Wear layers is definitely something you're going to want. And then bring a book or bring an e-ink device or like a Kindle Paperwhite. I actually now have one on order because trying to read a book on my iPad up in the sun didn't work that well, and I didn't really want to be down in my cabin. I mean, it's a beautiful experience being there on the deck of the boat, but it's a laid back experience, a chance for chatting with people, a chance for catching up on a book, not so much a chance for catching up on your email. Your internet connection, cell phone connection would come and go depending on where we were sailing. Sometimes I had 3 bars and could catch up on all my email. And then some nights we'd anchor in a bay and there would be no bars at all. And you just had to be satisfied that everything was okay. You didn't need the internet to survive. The next day, Tuesday, we sailed with a moderate southwest wind, and I have this from the captain's log. So every day the captain will update log notes, which is about a paragraph of information about the sailing, as well as on the other side there is a map, and you can follow along with the captain where we sailed, and you can take that map home. I just took a picture of it, but we got underway with a moderate southwest wind and headed east through Merchant Row. And this is a series of small islands that sit between Isle aux Hautes and Deer Island to the north that we sailed in between. Lots of these tiny islands. Most of the islands in this area are granite islands, very few beaches that have any place to land, and then they have trees on them.
The smaller islands are not particularly tall,
but quite a picturesque area to sail in between these. We then entered Jericho Bay. The wind became a little less consistent when we got to Jericho Bay, but we used the falling tide, so the tide is going out, to sail into Toothaker Bay. And then we basically spent the night then at Burnt Coat Harbor. I don't know where these names come from, but somebody had a toothache and somebody had a coat on fire. But we were at Burnt Coat Harbor on Swans Island. And this was one of the places where we did a shore excursion. We all got in the rowboat for the first time, but half of us got in the rowboat, those of us who were going ashore. And in a move that someone described as a spastic spider, we all rowed to shore to a jetty that was attached to a lobstering hut. A lobstering hut that looked like it might fall over at any minute, I might add. The idea is you're supposed to row together so that the person who is in front of you is supposed to set the pace for you, and you match your motion with their oars. Well, it helps if they're doing a consistent paddle, and if they're not, it's going to be hard. Then you're going to start knocking oars together, which is why it sometimes, especially the first, looks like a spastic spider. You'll have 8 different oars sticking out from this boat, and if they're all going together, it looks wonderfully graceful, and if they're not, it's just comical. There's a state park and a lighthouse there at Burnt Coat Harbor, and those of us who went ashore took a chance to hike up into there or maybe hike into the little town, but there's not a lot in that harbor. That day we'd sailed 13.8 nautical miles and our top speed a little less, about 7.6 knots. So the other thing I haven't talked about is this whole region after about July 4th is heavy into lobstering. And so all along the way, in every bay we're in, there are lobster traps and there are multicolored buoys that are marking the different lines for lobster traps. Usually one buoy has 2 traps attached to it, and then a lobsterman may have 1 trap here and another trap over there and another trap further over in a line, and they will come out usually about every 3 days and check the lobster trap. The bait is only good for about 3 days. If it's a very busy area where they're catching a lot of lobsters, then they may come out more often than that. but each lobsterman has a specific set of colors. So your buoy might be red with 2 yellow stripes, and that's going to let you see which are your traps and go out and tend to those. But there are just these buoys everywhere. It's like a confetti cake with all of these colorful dots on the water surface here. And so everywhere you're going through these. And if you're on the boat, especially in the morning, we saw lobstermen going out and tending to their traps. And one of the things they're doing is they're taking lobsters out of the trap, and more often than not, they're throwing them back. Because about 60% of the time, that lobster that you took out of the trap, you can't keep. You can't keep it if it's too young, but also you can't keep it if it's too old. And I'm not sure why that would be. It feels like they've led a full life at that point. And then you can't keep it if it's a female lobster with eggs. And if it is, you're going to notch the tail. And until that notch grows out, that lobster is not available to catch. You're going to throw it back. And that's a way of basically making sure that there are more lobsters for next season. And it's really policed predominantly by the lobstermen themselves. And I suspect wherever they're selling that to isn't going to want to buy a lobster that has that notch in the tail because they know that that should not be there.
We have a number of sponsors on Amateur Traveler, and I'm grateful for all of them. But my wife is excited that Boll and Branch has come back as a sponsor. If you're not familiar with Boll and Branch, they have high-quality organic cotton sheets, pillows, blankets, and comforters that are all designed to be breathable, incredibly soft, and get better over time. We have Boll and Branch on our bed right now. They asked me to talk about a time in my life when sleep stops being optional, and sleep has never been optional. Even in college, I tried to get a good night's sleep, and sleep is important to me. Doing this podcast on top of a full-time job for 19 years, I did not skimp on my sleep. Sleep is very important, and what you put on your bed can affect your sleep. Consider their signature organic cotton sheets, their plush pillows, their breathable blankets, and their temperature-regulating comforters. Upgrade your sleep with Boll and Branch. Get 15% off your first order plus free shipping at bollandbranch.com/ATChris with code ATChris. That's Boll and Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/ATChris. Code ATChris to unlock 15% off. Exclusions apply. And thanks to Boll and Branch for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. Whether I'm going to my local tandoori chicken wrap place or buying something from a food truck, quite often I find myself using Square because vendors are discovering that Square gives them the ability to have payments, point of sale, inventory, staffing, and other online sales in one system. Its AI power tools automate routine tasks, giving business owners more time. What you don't see is that on the back end, real-time insights help you make smarter business decisions and connect you easily with apps you already use. Choose from 3 simple plans: free, plus, or premium. Sellers using Square software see 9% higher sales on average. If you're starting a business or running one that deserves better tools, Square helps you sell, manage, and grow without slowing down. Right now, you get up to $200 off Square hardware at square.com/go/traveler. That's SQUARE.com/GO/traveler. Run your business smarter with Square. Get started today. But it was interesting to watch them. Of course, in good weather, it doesn't look all that bad, but I can imagine doing this in more inclement weather is going to be a little more challenging. There's nothing on the back of these lobster boats to make it easy to get the traps back into the boat, but it would also be fairly easy to fall off the back of the boat. So the challenges of being a lobsterman, a lobsterer, I'm not sure what the current term is for that. A lobstering license lets you have up to 800 different traps, which is just a lot. So that's a lot to check in any given day. And then if you average about 1 pound of lobster per trap, you're doing well. Speaking of lobsters, the whole time on this trip, from the beginning of this trip, we had a metal tank with lobsters aboard, live lobsters, obviously. At night, they would let them down into the sea in
in crates that had holes to get them fresh water, but that was all set for our lobster bake at Lobster Island. And on Wednesday, indeed, we were going to sail to Lobster Island. And this is what I didn't understand. I'm trying to figure out how it is we don't know where we're going, and yet we're going to Lobster Island. How can that be? But it was pretty obvious on Wednesday that I had missed a memo because Captain Ben said we're going to be looking for Lobster Island. And I'm thinking, well, he's got charts, he's got GPS. How do you look for an island if you know where it is? Turns out that Lobster Island is kind of like the designation for Air Force One. Air Force One is only Air Force One when the president is on there, and Lobster Island is some other island with a beach that we can get the boats up to and do a lobster boil or a lobster bake, and it is just the designation for that trip. So that particular day, we got under sail, and we hosted in the yawl boat, and we tacked with the tide back into Jericho Bay. So we're sailing back towards Rockland again. And we began with a fresh northwest wind, according to the captain's log, with the wind gradually diminishing during the day. Then we short tacked in lighter air near McGathery Island. And short tack meaning you're doing a lot more zigzagging. And anchored near Wreck Island. And that trip, Wreck Island, was also then Lobster Island, which is a much cheerier name, you'd have to say. So they brought out Lois Lane and brought the lobsters and a cooking pot and all of the things we needed for having dinner aboard the island in one boat, while the rest of us gathered into the other boats and rowed ourselves in. This is one of the events for the sail, and I think they do the lobster boil, lobster bake, even on the shorter cruises because it really is sort of a seminal experience here. And so they had hot dogs and hamburgers waiting for us by the time we got to the shore, and chips. And then they dropped the lobsters into the boiling pot. You could put your own lobster in there if you wanted, which is over a wood fire which they have started on the beach. And there you go, fresh lobsters available. It's a signature photo opportunity, too, to get a picture of the lobsters all arranged after they've come out of the water and the fire. And then behind that, the crew will line up for a photo shoot. And then people ate their fill of lobsters. And there was also corn and watermelon and s'mores for dessert. People sitting around in camp chairs or sitting on the rocks. It's a fun experience, and I can see why it's one of the signature events of that. There was just the lapping of the waves and the call of the seabirds and the ship in the distance silhouetted against the sunset. So that Wednesday, we had sailed a distance of 18.1 nautical miles and a top speed only of 7.9 knots. And then Thursday was an eventful day because Thursday we were racing a squall. So we got up on Thursday, and normally on Thursday from where we were at Wreck Island, probably what we would have done is sail up to Deer Island to Stonington, which is a town that actually has things to go and see. It has shops, it has restaurants. It is also where my son-in-law's parents have a place. In fact, they were staying at Deer Island that weekend with my son-in-law's brother and his wife and family, and I was thinking I would get a chance to see them, but no, when we got up that morning, we saw that there was thunderstorms that were predicted to arrive about 2 o'clock was the first prediction that we have. And so Captain Ben very quickly changed whatever plans he had before this, and again, everything is all flexible, and said we're going to make our way towards Vinyl Haven. Not sure how to say that one again. And the reason for that is if you look at a map and you take a look at that island, there is a wonderfully sheltered cove inside that island, which would be a great place to be during a storm. Now, the problem for that is you don't know exactly how long it's going to take you to get there. You can predict based on what they think the wind will do, but the wind was a little slower than they predicted, came up a little slower. And so we originally thought we might have to use the yawl boat to push us through this bay. We had a date to keep. We wanted to be in that cove, and we wanted to have the sails down and furled before the thunderstorms hit us. So we slowly beat to the windward across the bay towards Vinalhaven, and the breeze eventually strengthened. Fortunately, the storm also delayed, so it was now going to be a 3 o'clock storm. We entered into Carver Cove. We dropped the anchor. We dropped the storm anchor, which is the heavier chain and the heavier anchor, and we struck the sails. And what you're doing at this point is you're lowering the sails, and then also passengers are helping, especially with the mainsail, to furl it, to basically fold it back and forth on itself so that it's more neat and will deploy better next time. And then once you've got it furled, you're going to tie it together so that it is more protected. We got all that done. They just started putting up the awning. I didn't say that before, but in the middle part of the boat, when you're not sailing, they put up an awning to give a shaded area that you can sit under, where you're sitting on your camp chairs or you're sitting on those coolers, or they were starting to put up that awning and the storm hit. And we knew it was supposed to be thunderstorms. Actually, we didn't end up seeing any thunder and lightning. That was good news. But Captain Banna had heard that at one of the harbors there were 60 knot winds, which is rather a lot. And I think by that time we had heard that one of the cruise ships had pushed off the harbor. I think our original reports, we were hearing that people had dropped into the bay. That turned out to not be the case. Fortunately, no one was hurt. But when those winds hit, they hit really hard. It was very sudden. We went from having just mild breezes to now everything is flapping in the breeze, and the rain is just blowing sideways. One of the things they told us to bring, which I had forgotten, was rain pants as well as a rain slicker. And those people who had brought that were better prepared for that particular weather that night. So we were very fortunate that we had gotten there just in time. All the planning worked well. We'd gotten everything battened down. No damage. Everything is okay. But then we start to hear over the radio of 2 different boats from the Windjammer fleet have had their foresails shredded by this wind. So from what we could tell, they were still trying to outrun the storm. And one of them we know was sailing into Rockland because it was doing a quicker turnaround. It had a shorter cruise. And that was the J&E Riggin. They lost their front sail. It was shredded. Fortunately, they have spares. And then also their yawl boat was swamped. And that was a big concern because Ben said, well, they would certainly have a spare sail. They've been doing this for years, but we weren't sure if they were going to be able to salvage the yawl boat. If the engine had been running when it swamped, it probably would need major repairs, or whether they were going to be replaced by borrowing one from someone else. But we were pleased to hear that they were able to get their next cruise underway the next day. But again, if you have your sails up and you get caught by 60 knot winds, it's not good. Bad things happen. And the Riggins was actually the first boat that I was contacted with about doing this cruise in Maine. But I can't remember why, but I think they didn't have availability when I did. And so I ended up on the Heritage. So in another world, I would have been on the boat at that time. After the storm blew past, it was a lovely evening. Some of the passengers even got out in the lowest lane and rode around the bay.
On the boat here? You were told you could do this?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was told I wasn't supposed to go that way. So I'm going to go everywhere else.
Please don't leave before.
Right.
The next day, Friday, was more of a typical day. So let's talk about a typical day. A typical day, as we said, the coffee comes out at about 6:15, breakfast in the mess at about 8 o'clock. You raise the sails and raise the anchor, and then sail among the islands, the bays, and the working waterfronts, potentially stop at one of those. You have lunch underway. That's pretty typical, up out on the deck. And then you anchor in a protected harbor late in the afternoon, possibly have a trip ashore in one of the small boats, and then an afternoon snack or appetizer, dinner in the mess, and then sunset on deck, followed by a quiet evening surrounded by the water, at least on 2 different nights. We were serenaded by our captains, Ben and Sean, playing songs on their guitars. And then, as I said, the whole route on a typical day changes according to weather, wind, and tide. I mentioned the meals, but let's talk about what we ate, because food is a great part of the experience. It isn't just Sean, but also other members of the crew who are cooking or especially who are baking. Coffee and tea is always available throughout the day. Breakfast would be things like blueberry pancakes and sausage, biscuits and scrambled eggs, boat meal, which is oatmeal served with granola. It might be served also with a banana coffee cake, or another day with blueberry buckle. French toast and bacon and fruit was a different day. And then the final day was a lobster frittata, ham, quiche, potatoes, fruit, and sticky buns. That one served up on deck as we were sailing back towards the harbor. Lunches would be things like fish tacos, chili and cornbread, chicken and rice soup with anadama bread, which is a local New England bread made with cornmeal and molasses. Really good. Reminded me of brown bread from Ireland. Turkey wraps, pasta salad, minestrone, and honey wheat bread. Again, we had 3 different types of fresh baked breads. And then snacks, we had fresh cookies, including chocolate chip cookies, lemon drops, peanut butter cookies, snickerdoodles on different days, also some monster brownies. They're going to trigger your diabetes immediately. We had homemade lobster and salmon spreads, crab cakes, charcuterie boards, artichoke and mushroom dip, and then dinners were things like salmon and risotto and strawberry shortcake, or urban crusted chicken with lemon sherry sauce, or the lobster bake, which you've talked about, lasagna, French bread, salad, and lemon mousse. That was one of the most popular dinners. And then I would say pot roast, although that really undersells how good that was. This was meat that had been marinated for about 3 hours in wine and tomato sauce and lots of cloves of garlic. It was wonderful. Mashed potatoes, carrots, peach cobbler, and homemade ice cream made on the boat, because you don't have freezers to keep ice cream cold. We were told multiple times that we were not eating enough cookies. They actually tried a dessert-first themed cruise one time. They're still experimenting with different theme cruises, and the people who booked that cruise paid extra for it, and a lot of them couldn't eat much dessert, so they wondered why you would pay extra for a theme cruise with desserts and not eat desserts. Friday, as I said, was a normal sail day. We sailed off the anchor in a brisk northwest wind, according to the log, tacked through Northwest Harbor, passed through Eagle Island Passage and crossed West Penobscot Bay, and then sailed into Pulpit Harbor past Pulpit Rock, where there's a rock that has an osprey nest that has been there for at least 100 years. We hadn't used the yawl boat in almost 3 days, and so that means we've had good sailing weather. We sailed about 26.8 nautical miles, and our top speed that day was 8.8 knots, so some good sailing. And if you look at the map, we basically sailed over to Deer Island and then back to the other side of North Haven Island from where we had started in that day, and that's where you'd find Pulpit Harbor. Some of the more adventurous crew and younger members of the passengers jumped off the ship into the water there in Pulpit Harbor.
Get this memo.
Get this memo.
Okay. All right, I'll go with you.
I'm going this way.
3, 2, 1.
And the other fun thing that we did in Pulpit Harbor is we fired off the cannon, or Sean fired off the cannon, to sound a salute to the other ships in the harbor.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire in the hole!
Wow.
On Saturday, we needed to get back before noon. We had a pleasant motor sail, so we actually used the yawl boat there to push us back to Rockland Harbor and served brunch underway, which I mentioned only went about 1.3 nautical miles, so a shorter sail, and only about 5.1 knots, because the reason we were pushing is there was no wind, and we returned to the North End Shipyard. Total voyage distance about 116 miles. A couple things that I learned in terms of maritime superstitions. Whistling aboard is discouraged, and traditionally the belief was that whistling could summon the wind or a storm, but there are also practical concerns on Navy ships that commands were sometimes given with whistles, and that might confuse people. And one thing I liked was traditionally there was an exception for the cook, because you wanted to hear the cook whistling because you knew if they're whistling, they weren't eating the provisions. So speaking of the shipyard where we're back in, this shipyard is used to service the whole fleet. Every 2 years, you have to have a hull inspection. Every 6 years, a connector or fastener inspection. It's all done with the Coast Guard. And as we said, every 10 years, you have to remove the mast and inspect it. And a lot of the off-season is spent in maintenance. They will do maintenance work after they park the boat in September, and then they'll start again in April and paint everything again and scrape off all the decks and reseal it. So a lot of work goes into maintaining the boat. And most of the crew arrives in April to start with that. The next season schedule usually appears around June. People who have sailed with them get both a 5% discount and also they get first chance at the season's schedule. And they do have some special trips like the annual schooner race in July. And that's one of the ones that I said that there are some sailings where you do have to be in a certain place at a certain time. And so they are going down the coast to get to this annual schooner race. And that happens around the 4th of July. And then there are also special trips like Perseid meteor shower sailings that happen in August. I'll put a link in the show notes to their website and check their schedule for special sailings. So, practical advice. You can't bring heating appliances such as hair dryers on a boat. It's a wooden boat. They don't want the risk. They encourage you to bring soft-sided luggage because there's very limited storage in the cabins. And so they want you to have something that you can just throw under the lower bunk. Pack layers, bring a rain jacket, and then ideally, like I forgot, rain pants. Bring boots, they say. I actually had my water shoes, and that worked well. They say 2 pairs of non-skid soft-soled shoes. I had my water shoes and tennis shoes, and that was fine. Sunscreen a must, lip balm, sunglasses, and a hat, and preferably a hat with a string. We saw Sean lose one hat overboard to the winds. They would gladly sell you a hat or a t-shirt or a sweatshirt or whatever from the ship's store. And honestly, those green hats, I wonder if I should have bought one. If you're going to listen to anything in your cabin, bring headphones. The walls between the cabins don't necessarily go all the way up to the ceiling, so you don't have a lot of privacy there. Let them know if you have dietary restrictions well before departure so that they can plan accordingly. Consider a cash gratuity for the crew of about 10% of the cost of your cruise. I forgot to bring cash, but I was able to do something via Venmo. To get to Rockland, it's about 2 hours from Portland by car, 4 hours from Boston by car. I flew there. You can only fly on a very small airline, which is Cape Air, so you have to be comfortable in small planes. It's also then 60 miles south of Bangor. There is a Concord coach from Boston or Portland if you want to get there by bus. If you're driving, free parking is available at the wharf. There were people who were driving in from the Midwest all the way from Iowa and Nebraska. And you board at 11 Front Street, and that is on their website. Who is this trip for? So if you're interested in maritime history, hands-on sailing, good food, but not fancy food, island scenery, slow travel, and a good conversation. It's a nice group of people that you're going to meet on one of these boats. And I know because 60% of them are probably going to be the same people that I sailed with. I asked Frank, who is one of those people who was doing 2 trips back to back and who had done more than 50 on the Heritage, what he liked about it. And one of the things he liked about it was the size of the boat, which is small enough that you can get to know people and big enough that if you don't hit it off with them, you don't have to talk to them. And you've got to be comfortable with compact cabins, shared facilities like the one shower, and then you have to have enough mobility to get up and down ladders, and then also to get off the boat and into the rowboat. And you do that by climbing down a ladder on the side of the boat. It looks a little scary, but isn't. You can find the official Schooner Heritage site at schoonerheritage.com and the Maine Windjammer Association at mainewindjammerfleet.com. And basically, the season runs June through early October. I talked to some of the people who had done 25 different sailings, and they had tried every month. They said June and September are going to be cooler. So if you're traveling in those months, pack accordingly for some cooler weather. And then they actually have found that they like that week after July 4th when the lobsters are starting to run more as their favorite time to go. So that was my trip. It's not a list of destinations. It's a different kind of trip, but it's a series of memories of wonderful talks, winds, raising sails and lowering them, furling sails and eating well. So, the usual questions that I ask. You're standing in the prettiest spot. Where are you standing? What are you looking at? A lot of the different bays that we were in, like Burnt Coat Bay or Pulpit Bay, were very pretty. The one that we waited out the storm in had some beautiful and rather expensive houses, I would guess, up on the bluffs there. I would say probably that it's one of those, though. I would go for Pulpit Bay, which was just filled with sailboats. And, of course, the ever-present lobster traps. One thing that makes me laugh and say only on a Maine Windjammer cruise, it still took me a couple days to get used to the, where are we going today, Captain? And he would say, I don't know. And he was completely and totally honest. And if I had to summarize the experience in 3 words, I would say sailing, obviously, peaceful, and relaxing. This is just that kind of trip. And that was my cruise on the Heritage. And again, my thanks to Ben and Sean, who were not only our captains, but also the owners, and therefore were hosting me on this trip, as well as to the wonderful crew that made it a great time, and the fellow passengers that made it a terrific and memorable trip. When we were kids, summer meant freedom. No homework, no teachers, no school. And as adults, summer means freedom thanks to Mint Mobile's summer sale. Right now, all of Mint Mobile's plans are $15 per month, even unlimited. So free yourself from big wireless and their gimmicks and gotchas and switch to Mint for high-speed data and coverage on the T-Mobile 5G network. I told you that long before Mint Mobile became a sponsor, I was looking at Mint Mobile to save money on my wireless plan, because why spend more? All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. To get your new plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/traveler. That's mintmobile.com/traveler. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/traveler. That's it. There's no catch. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12 months plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes. May slow when network is busy. Includes up to 20 gigabyte hotspot. Capable devices required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. See mintmobile.com.
Running a small business means I wear lots of hats. When I put on my hiring hat, I can count on LinkedIn Hiring Pro to make it easy. LinkedIn Hiring Pro helps manage my hiring workflow, puts my job post in front of a unique network of professionals, and matches me with the best candidates for my business. I can also share my job with my network. No other job site lets me do that. No wonder most small businesses say they'd use LinkedIn Hiring Pro again. Hire right the first time. Post your job for free on LinkedIn today at linkedin.com/quality.
And speaking of special thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler. If you're interested in learning more how you can become a patron of the show, get an ad-free version, a monthly Zoom call, then go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. There are still spaces on the Bolivia trip next year. Now, I know some of you voted for this trip, but haven't signed up yet. So you can do that by going to amateurtraveler.com/trips to learn more, or just drop me an email and I'll send you the information. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
I'm David Pryor, a travel writer and founder of the travel company Pryor. I'm inspired by places, but also curious about people.
I was 19 years old. It was fantastic.
It is so foreign, and it felt so apocalyptic.
So here I am talking to culture makers about their stories, what they've discovered on the road, and trying to understand the nature of their curiosity.
Talk about where I saw culture for the first time. That mushroom tart, it was like sex.
This is a show about how travel informs the story of our lives. This is Traveling Through, Listen wherever you get your podcasts.